What's that?
You might have to call us to order again.
Yeah. Oh,
For the benefit, just
Yeah.
like we're starting the meeting over with outside people.
yes. This is a Zoom and in-person meeting. We'll call the Senate Revenue Committee meeting to order. The first item on our agenda will be Senate File 69, Ad valorem tax administration. For explanation of that bill, Chairman Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This bill came about because of the work that the interim committee did. It's not an interim committee bill, I assure you, but what happened was we were looking at the valuation of wind farms in Wyoming, and we had a hard time really understanding how that valuation occurred. We enlisted the help of our county assessors and the County Assessors Association. In the end, we ran up against the statutory prohibition that prohibits the sharing of the information on this state assessed property. I was a little surprised that a lot of this wind stuff is state assessed. There is a section of statute that talks about state assessment being for electric utilities, but a lot of wind facilities aren't electric utilities. They're independent power producers. And but they are still state assessed. We were trying to figure out how that state assess occurred. The Department of Revenue was very cooperative, but in the end, it was apparent that there's tension between the counties where this tax revenue goes, where the assessors are not allowed to even look at the information without the permission of the taxpayer. So that's what this bill does. It goes into where the information is confidential. And if you look on page 2 of the bill, and under section A, lines 14 through 16 is the new language. And it's talking about the whole little section is about information filed with the department may be released to the governor, members of the State Board of Equalization, to the commissioners and the employees of the Public Service Commission, to employees of the Department of Audit, the Department of Revenue, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, and to the Attorney General. So this is a new language. Information related to state assessed property may be released upon request to the county assessor of a county where the property is located. And that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. There are people here to be happy to testify on the bill. There will be, we have some folks here, including former Chairman Al Manier, who was Chairman of the Board of Equalization, who will talk about some of the shortcomings that he feels is involved in the assessment of wind farms, basically. And so we'd like to proceed and hear from these people, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good point to start. If the Board of Equalization would like to come up to testify.
He's not the current, he's former
Yeah,
chair.
the former chair, excuse me.
Yeah.
Welcome to Revenue.
Thank you.
Watch for the green light.
It's kind of touchy. Oh, okay.
Great. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Al Manier. I'm the former chairman of the State Board of Equalization and the former chairman of the Public Service Commission. I'm here today to kind of explain what it is that I'm concerned about with regard to the valuation of wind for ad valorem purposes. I've sent you all a letter. I'm going to, since I know you have a lot of people, I'm going to try to distill this into a couple of minutes. So if I go a little too fast, I hope you'll back me up and do some filling. But fundamentally what it comes down to is the State Department of Revenue has rules for valuing industrial properties. And it's an appraisal method that's specified in their rule. So when you evaluate an industrial property, which in my case, the one that most focused on is what they refer to as non-regulated wind farm generation. That is somebody that's not under the aegis of a utility. I'll come back to why in a second why that is. Their rules specify that for industrial facilities, you use three approaches to determine what a value is. So there's an appraisal judgment involved, but it has three essentially tenets. The first one is to use historic cost less depreciation. I'm going to simplify these a little bit. The second one is called capitalized earnings. And the third one is called, I think, market comparison. Basically, the idea is that you take information you have, and sometimes you don't have as much as you'd like. You use these three methods and try to apply the three methods, and you use appraisal judgment to come up with what you get in the end. The problem I'm having, and again, I'm giving the short version, is that there are published sources now that explain what happens to non-regulated wind farms. One that came to my attention was in a report done in 2019 by Rob Godby, who's a well-known professor at the University of Wyoming, that critiqued Wyoming's wind taxation policy. Another one that I'm familiar with is the calculations for what the expected ad valorem taxes are for the rail tie wind project, which is supposed to go over in Albany County. And I'm familiar with that. In fact, I got into this because I own property over there and I'm concerned about that facility. But the three things the thing that Rob Godby said was the basis for the valuation that the Department of Revenue would provide would be, quote, assessment based on 11.5% of depreciated facility value taxed at 6.8%. So there's an assessment on a value, it's an industrial value. And then he summarized the depreciation method as straight line, 20-year, 20% floor. Okay, so what's missing? The first thing was there was no reference at all to the real property that the wind farm was going to sit on. I've subsequently learned that the way that, the reason that's a problematic area is because the wind farms, the independent property producers in particular, tend to lease their land from agricultural landowners. Okay, so it's who's going to pay the tax and how much. And originally, what I was looking at, and it seemed to be echoed in the department's own memorandum about its appraisal methods, was something that was a mix of agricultural assessment, but not clear what they're doing. As I understand it now, what the department does is takes the entire project footprint and uses the leased values that are being collected to generate a value. They do that using return on and of investment. I don't have much problem with that because it essentially identifies the entire footprint of the project as being industrial for tax purposes, as opposed to part agriculture and part industrial. And I think they are industrial, and I think they should be taxed that way. I still don't understand how that all fits together. In other words, I've never seen leases. Because of the way this confidentiality works out, people like me that might have some background in looking at it have no way to actually examine what a package of leases and a wind farm looks like and compare that to, say, another package of leases for another wind farm and perhaps another wind farm that's owned by a utility that bought the ranch years ago. No way to figure out how this is all fitting together so that it works fairly for everybody. But nonetheless, there's a step in the right direction. The second problem I have is it appears, and this is echoed in the department's memorandum about how it does appraisals, that the only practical approach they have for appraising wind farms that are particularly the non-regulated flavor is the historic cost new less depreciation method. Now, why does that bother me? Well, because what happens is if you have the three approaches to value, they tend to even out over time. So if you have a power plant, for example, a big old power plant that's being depreciated, you're out to it, it's a 40-year power plant, you're out to 35 years of its life, it's still generating a lot of revenue. So based on what that revenue stream is, you can come up with an appraisal for what the value is. If you only use historic cost new less depreciation, what happens is, as you get to the end of the life of the plant, you've got a dinky value. You're not using the method of appraisal that's really specified in the rules. So as far as I'm concerned, that's simply wrong. What they're doing really, if that's really the way this is working, that they're only using historic cost new less depreciation, the plant's being undervalued and in the out years in particular, okay? So that means by the time you get out to if it's a 40-year facility, by the time you get to year 30, as opposed to keeping track of how much revenue is being generated, you're only looking at what the depreciated plant still is. That's not enough. And reasons I'm concerned about this is not only is Railtie proposing to do it this way, but this is one of those problems that isn't really a big problem right now. Well, everybody's so excited about getting sales and use tax revenue. It's a big problem for somebody that's a generation away from where we are that finds themselves wondering, sort of, as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say when he looks at himself getting out of the pool, what the hell happened here? We're down to the point where we know we should be getting more revenue off, ad valorem tax revenue off of this. What happened? And then you wind up with the imbroglios we've had a generation ago with oil and gas revenues, where you wind up with all sorts of competing values. It's time to get on top of this before it gets out of hand. The third thing I have a problem with is it appears from the sources I'm looking at that a 20-year depreciation method is standard. Well, I know the Railtie project is a 35-year plan, but they're using a 20-year depreciation method too. Now, why are they doing that? Anytime you can accelerate depreciation, and you're a place like you're giving a bonus to the guys in your tax department that got the state to do that for you. And that starts out little, but it gets big pretty fast. So you don't notice the difference probably the first year. It's not going to strike you that you're on a 35-year plant. First year depreciation, if you use historic cost, less depreciation. You're not going to notice a difference between using 20 years and 35 years, but as you go on, you certainly do notice the difference. So, so I've got these concerns. And there are other things about the way the wind industry that's also concerning to me. I really don't know where the production tax credit fits into all this. I don't know whether that winds up becoming an asset. I don't know whether that, you certainly are, there's some confusion in the department's memorandum about sort of how much the department is even told about what happens to the production tax credit money. I think we just really don't understand, at least I feel, as a member of the public now, that we really don't understand enough about what's going on with this. And I'm not here to pick a fight with the DOR. I'm just saying that from the standpoint of the public, not having any window into the actual data, I feel that there's something that's not right here. And I think we need to get on top of it beforehand rather than later. And I think the reason that I guess I have supported the approach that's here, and I understand Wendy Lowe just gave me an earful, but the reason that I think it's the right approach to get somebody like the assessors involved is because they have the training to do appraisal, the background to do appraisal. They do it all the time. I would have some limitations at this point since it's 20 years since I took the course, although I don't think some of this changes that much. But I think there are a lot of issues to be unpacked here. And I think more people with some expertise need to be able to do it. So I'm happy to answer any of your questions. And I guess I should also, and I'm not paid to do this anymore. I'm just here because I'm worried about this. And I hope that somehow, even if I haven't picked the right forum to pick this up and run with it, I still think this is a very serious problem. And given what's coming down the pike, we need to be out in front of this problem rather than waiting until it turns out that's really a problem. And I just don't want to be in that position. So thank you very much. And any questions you have, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much for that well-articulated testimony. We appreciate that. Any questions, committee?
Okay, thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much. I believe Department of Revenue looks like they want to be next in line. It's because he has such a great tie. Welcome, Mr. Noble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Dan Noble. I'm Director of the Department of Revenue. I think I'm going to speak to this as it relates to overall confidentiality and how it's dealt with across the board, not just with ad valorem taxes and state assessed properties, locally assessed as well, and sales tax for that matter, and servants taxes. There is I guess I'd call it a tenet of confidentiality is associated with companies' records. We're required to maintain the confidentiality of those records across, all of those different taxes, and to this point, in different ways in certain areas. But we're also held accountable in certain areas as well. And I think that's only fair. The Department of Revenue needs to have someone looking over their shoulder, just like anyone else would. Are we doing our jobs properly? There is an entity that does have oversight over the Department of Revenue, and that is the State Board of Equalization. They look at our assessments. When people have issues with the way that we assess property or how we assess a sales tax or a severance tax, they are the quasi-judicial board that oversees that. In the past, there has been an audit of the department's practices as it relates to state assessed property. It's been 25 years since that has happened, but I think it's probably something that should be done more regularly, and probably to kind of get a feel for the fact that we are using the appropriate assessment practices as it relates to these properties. I think that's probably a way of maintaining the confidentiality that people are concerned with, rightfully so, but ensuring that the assessment practices are appropriate for the assessments that we do. Turning this information over to the counties who do not have jurisdiction associated with this doesn't give them the ability to do any of that. You have to be specially qualified to do the type of appraisal we're talking about. County assessors are certified to do mass appraisal. It's a different animal than state assessed property. But the thing is, what we're really after here is determining whether or not the assessments that are being done by the Department of Revenue as it relates to wind properties are appropriate. And I suggest that the way to do that and maintain the confidentiality issues that are out there is to look at an audit of our practices. I think I'd welcome it. I personally think that the department would welcome that, and then you would be able to maintain the confidential record requirements that have been in place for years, and allow us to open those records up to a third party to audit it and make sure that the practices that are being followed are appropriate. You'd heard that we use historic cost less depreciation for wind farms. There are 2 properties where that is done. It's only because they show negative income as it relates to the actual their income stream. And so we're left with one methodology. There are no comparable sales, so you look to historic cost less depreciation. All other properties are valued using the income approach. In some instances, during the very early parts of construction, you may have a little bit of production going on at the same time and income being generated, but it's not enough to generate a steady income stream. So we use a combination of the historic cost less depreciation, and we weight that against the income approach. So I think the assessment practices are appropriate, and we welcome someone to audit the records. But I don't know that upsetting the confidentiality statutes associated with all state assessed property is the appropriate way to deal with it. If we're undervaluing property, we'll know about that soon. And I think that's probably something that like I said, we would welcome someone to audit that has jurisdiction associated with our practices. And I think that would make some sense. Certainly stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Director. I have one question. That is, have you ever had complaints about undervaluing any of those properties?
Mr. Chairman, when you're talking to a company, you're never going to get a complaint about underassessing their property. When I say something is exempt for sales tax purposes, no one ever complains. It's typically when I say it's taxable that I end up with people being concerned about it. But I think the real issue here is, are these practices appropriate for valuing wind farms? And that's really the question that we're looking at today.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Questions, committee? Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I just have kind of 2 questions. I understand about the audit, but if a taxpayer doesn't want to allow its information to be shared, how does an audit happen?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Director Noble.
Chairman Case, I'm having trouble with this.
It's okay.
The way that we have to deal with this is the way we do with any audit. We're allowed to contract audits. We're allowed to, through the Department of Audit, we can actually conduct these audits. That's how it was done in 1995 when it was done before. We have access to the records, and we can provide those as part of an examination of the audit itself. And that's procedures that not only in place for property taxes, for sales taxes and anything. We can actually have those records subpoenaed. The Department of Audit has the ability to subpoena it. We can contract with a third party to do that. That's why I think it'd be wise to use someone that has a jurisdictional ability to do that. I guess the other question is that if it was turned over to the public or to the counties, they can't release it to anybody. So they couldn't have a third party come in and audit it because they don't have jurisdiction over those records.
Mr. Chairman,
Follow up.
on the first one, I still have another one. So what would an audit tell us, and what would the audit say that could be shared to provide? They'd say, we looked at the numbers, they look good. They wouldn't be able to say the numbers are or anything like that.
Mr. Chairman, I think what they could speak to, and this is typically how, Chairman Case, this is typically how audits are conducted. You're going to say you're either in compliance or you're not. If you're doing a compliance audit, you're going to say you're valuing this property appropriately or you're not. And then you remand it back to us to do it appropriately. That's
Fair enough. Mr. Chairman, the second question is, when I look at what is state assessed property, I see, and I'm looking at section that says the department shall, it's in 3913-102, it's M, and it has that list, gross products of mines and mineral claims, pipeline companies, and then it says it does have property of electric utilities is Roman at 3, but I don't see independent wind farms in there. They're not property of electric utilities. So why are they state assessed to begin with?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, Chairman Case, I'm not sure I can answer that question directly. I think it was probably you're probably going to capture 3/4 of the wind farms under public utilities anyway. The other 25% or more that are out there, it would only make sense for us to do those as well. I'm not sure that it is totally according to Hoyle, but it probably makes economic sense for us to value them as well. Now, whether or not that is something that should be clarified in statute, it probably should be. The other thing would be to take that 1/4 and turn it over directly to local government and have it be locally assessed using the same type of approach.
Thank you. We could have more discussion about that, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Noble.
Senator Schuler, you had a question?
Sorry, Senator Schuler.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got oh,
There you go.
hello. Yeah, my question, Director, is, in looking at this bill was, basically, do you think our county assessors have the training and the expertise to do these appraisals? And do you think maybe they have the time even, or is this going to put a lot of extra burden on them?
Director Noble?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, let's put it this way. The county assessors spend a great deal of time learning mass appraisal techniques. And it is a complicated process in and of itself. State assessed property is a carve out of that, if you will, because it looks at approaches in a very different way. You're looking at individual companies as opposed to properties and valuing them based on the way that the environment around those properties looks financially. So I think they're two different issues. There may be some assessors out there that have state assessed property training. I can't answer that, but the point being, is it something that is a daily part of their life? I would say probably no. But the fact is, there is a mechanism to basically, if we're having an issue with whether or not our properties, our state assessed properties are being undervalued, we can, or overvalued for that matter, We could certainly subject it to a third-party audit to make those determinations for us, and at least give the public some reasonable comfort that the procedures that we're following are appropriate.
Further questions, committee? Thank you very much, Director Noble.
Thank you.
I think that's a perfect segue into the assessors. We have 4 open chairs. If only one of you wants to come up. Yeah, they all laughed when you were walking up here. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, member of the Revenue Committee, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor, and today representing the County Assessors Association. So just a little brief history. As Chairman Case mentioned to begin with, when this topic came up, county assessors were asked, are wind farms paying their fair share? Do we believe they are? Truthfully, we couldn't answer that question because we didn't know how they were valued. We have a value, but we did not have access to how they were valued. So that piqued our information and our questions to go looking. And we started asking. I specifically asked, I have some wind farms in my county, started asking for information. And to be very clear, yes, the statute does say that they can share information that is filed with another government if we show just cause. So I write the letter, I sign, not in blood, but I sign that says I won't disclose it, I won't share it. I want to look at the assets, can I see it? They shared 3/4 of them. There was a company that didn't want them to share with me. They wanted to do it personally. For whatever reason, we cannot make connections to do that, and I've not been able to talk to that company. So they did share with me the annual report, which is exactly what it is. The concern we had is that annual report does not give me the appraised value. It does not tell me what assets that company reported other than a lump sum number. And so we started asking some more questions, and unfortunately the department could not answer them, partially because of the confidentiality that they felt that they would be breaking, and partially because of appraisal practices, USPAP, which stands for Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Sorry, I had to look because I just refer to it as USPAP and I can never remember the exact names. But in their standards, which we are as appraisers all required to follow, basically it says that they cannot communicate the results of their appraisal with anybody other than the client, unless with the exception of state law or state agencies requirement. So in our mind, who was the client? The client is the taxpayer, or the client is the county that's going to get that value and do the assessment. That was a debate back and forth. We felt like that if we could put something in statute that said they could share that appraisal, all of the information, not just what's filed by the taxpayer, but all the information, then we would have access to know what was being assessed in our county, which is because we're in our counties every day. Unfortunately, the Department of Revenue does not have the resources to come out to these state facilities, whether it be a wind farm or any other state facility. They are valuing these facilities based on an annual report that is self-reported by the companies. Whether or not they get additional information is up to them with the time constraints they have. Sometimes less than 30 days from when they get those reports because of extensions that have been granted and the deadline to get us information. So we looked at this as an opportunity to help the department, not necessarily checking on their values per se, but to say, what are you missing? We're here, we're on the ground. We know when something's changed. Let us be a part of that. And we can only do that based on the annual reports we were getting if we could see the appraisal and the appraisal judgment that was used as well. Absolutely, we sign agreements that are confidential. We have confidential information in our offices now that we cannot share. Renditions, reports that the agricultural people, reports that the personal property reports that get filed, those are all confidential. So we're not foreign to the idea of keeping documents confidential, and we understand that we cannot go out and use that in any other way, except to say, hey, department, looks like they didn't report an additional asset. Do you have that asset? Now, could that just be better communication between the department and the counties? Possibly. But if we don't know what was reported, we don't know what's missing. And unfortunately, I'm not 100% sure that the department does if they've not seen that property, if they're truly relying on an annual report that's given by the company. Now, let's be clear, regulated versus non-regulated is different. There are reports that are filed on regulated companies that the department has assured us that they use as a reference point. They take what's reported by the taxpayer and compare it to those federally required reports. And that includes the minerals. The minerals do that. They compare it to the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission, Department of Audit audits those report. So there may be only a small group that really aren't looked at by anybody else but the department. The question was asked, does anybody complain about undervalue? Well, rarely. I get maybe one a year in my county when they get ready to sell their house and my value is too low. Then they want to know why I'm so low. But I think the bigger question would probably be how many appeals are there where the companies think they're overvalued? We could find 2 in the last 15 years. Is that an indication that we're undervaluing, or is that an indication that the department is right on or settling on a value that the taxpayer is willing to pay? I don't know. But without the oversight, as Director Noble talked about, where somebody's looking at those processes, and not just the processes, but the information that's being produced to them by the taxpayer, that oversight kind of goes away. We have it as county assessors. We have the Department of Revenue, State Board of Equalization, and the taxpayer checking on what we do. We just want to be available and have the opportunity legally in law to look at those appraisals. And if there's anything that we can do to help, that's what we want to do. I think I sent you guys all a white paper. Hopefully I've covered all those brief points in there. I would be happy to stand for any questions in the essence of time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huxtable. Questions, committee? Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just go ahead and ask the same question that I asked the director. So if this bill were to move forward, do you feel like the assessors around the state, given the fact that they would have more information on these large corporations and companies, wind farms, whatnot, would they have the time, the energy, the resources to maybe get inside the cracks there and find out if we're missing some revenue? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I do believe for those assessors that ask for the information, yes, I do think they would. Remember, this is only if the assessor asks for it. This is not an automatic that they're going to send this information out, only if the assessors ask for it. And there are many assessors that have attended that public utility class. We attend, yes, mass appraisal, we're certified in mass appraisal, but many of us, including myself, have attended those public utility courses and have knowledge on unitary method and all those other methods that they talk about. Whether I would want to delve into everyone in my county, probably not. But if I knew of a specific facility that I thought there might be a problem with, absolutely, I would take the time to look into it. I don't think we would do all of them, but this would give us the opportunity to look at those that we thought might have a problem.
Follow up? Nope. Further questions, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The director of the Department of Revenue was saying that you guys do mass appraisals. And I was wondering if that was such a good idea with a number of appeals that have happened in the past.
Chairman Baldwin, Senator James, I'm not sure I understand the question, but if you're asking if mass appraisal is the appropriate method for us to use for all properties in our counties?
Correct.
That is by standard and by rule and by law that we do that. Mass appraisal is not used on these state assessed, just to be specific. These are individually assessed properties using techniques, some used in mass appraisal, but some of them specific to these types of utilities. So we're not talking mass appraisal in the typical mass appraisal sense for these properties, but we're talking about it for all the rest to keep uniformity and fairness so that everybody's treated the same in mass appraisal. When you're talking about the thousands of parcels that are out there and the houses and the residential, the vacant land, the commercials, to assure that they're treated fair and equitably, mass appraisal does appear to be the most appropriate methodology, not only by rule and law, but it does seem to make sense.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question.
Follow up? Nope. Any further questions, committee? Thank you, Ms. Huxtable.
Thank you.
It looks like the commissioners may want to jump up here. Again, only one's jumping up. We have 4 chairs, gentlemen. Welcome to Revenue Committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the County Commissioners Association. Do appreciate the chance to comment. I do have 2 commissioners here. One of them is Brian Lovett, Laramie County Commissioner, who's in the back of the room. Online, we have Commissioner Rob Hendry from Natrona County. Mr. Chairman, I'll keep my comments brief. My members are strongly supportive of action in this area. If I was to think about this, the phrase that comes to mind is that often cited one from President Ronald Reagan of trust but verify. And unfortunately, in some situations as it exists here, counties, the public, the state in some sense, are left with just trusting, but no ability to verify. Do you think that the assessors are an appropriate, county assessors are an appropriate resource to assist the Department of Revenue with that local knowledge and additional assistance that can be provided? And maybe, as the director suggested, an audit is appropriate as well. So we would support that. Mr. Chairman, the other thing that came to my mind as I was thinking about this issue, and it came up in the context of industrial siting and a project, and I'm not going to give names here. I don't think that that's necessary, but I have a county that elected to send its sheriff and treasurer out to an industrial siting project just to do that trust but verify. And in that situation, they found a company that was not registered with a system, had equipment on site that they were not paying sales and use tax, were not paying into workers' compensation, had an additional 10 subcontractors that were not paying sales and use tax. So in that situation, county officials were doing their due diligence and helping not only the state, but also the local revenue picture on that project. And I think of that very similar to this issue. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions. Commissioner Hendry is here. I don't know that he has any additional comments on this issue. The real experts are those that have testified in front of us.
Very good. Let's ask Mr. Hendry if you would, Commissioner Hendry, if you would be interesting. If he raises his hand, we'll know he wants to testify. Let me see if he raised his hand. Lavelle, can you see his hand? No hand.
Mr. Chairman, this is Karen Vaughn again. I have Dan Neal and Pat Meyer with their hands raised. Would you like me to bring them into the room?
Yeah, let's hold on Pat Myers for 1 minute. We'll bring him in here in a couple minutes. If there are any questions for, oh, go ahead, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was just curious, so by finding one bad actor, it sounds like you're wanting to punish all the private sector companies by finding this one. And kind of going along with that, with having the county assessors and assisting the Department of Revenue with more hands on this information, it would seem like it would be more likely that this confidential information has more likelihood of getting out. And this is, information that belongs to the companies. So it just seems that it would have the likelihood of getting out, and that's not good for those companies. So I wonder if you might have an answer for that.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I don't come at this from the perspective that the vast majority of the companies in this state are bad actors. I just don't. In fact, I'm on the record recently talking about the mineral ad valorem system in particular, and coming from a belief that the vast majority, probably 99% of the companies, are doing the right thing and are acting appropriately. But those 1% can cause us problems, as we have seen in that particular situation. And so all I'm suggesting here is that we need some sort of a check and a balance in the system, whether that's assessors or whether that's a third-party auditor, or perhaps both, to make sure that our systems are operating properly. And I do have confidence in the county assessors and their ability to remain or to maintain confidentiality relative to records. I'm not asking for that information to come to commissioners. It should go to those that have subject matter expertise.
Very good. Further questions, committee? Mr. Ryman, thank you very much for your testimony. Let's let Mr. Myers in now, if we could. Mr. Myers, we can't see you. We hear you're there. We trust, but we'd like to verify it with a picture if we could. So far, we're still trusting. And there he is. We verified it. You're here. Mr. Myers, would you like to testify to the committee?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfect. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, real good. I'm Pat Meyer, the Park County Assessor. And as the Assessor Huxtable has said, we were asked to start looking into this just to make sure they did their fair share. And I just want to go over some of the questions. Do we have the time to do this? Well, somehow our small committee has had the time to look into mostly every wind farm state in the country to see how they're valuing it. We've done a lot of research, but the problem we were having to actually see how Wyoming was doing was we couldn't figure out how Wyoming was doing it. We weren't able to see appraisals and so forth. And we have a lot of work yet on the other states, but a lot of it's coming together. As far as assessors training on this, it's true, a lot of us have had utility appraisal courses along with several income approaches. And you have to remember, the assessors, we have to know fee appraisal just like mass appraisal. We have to know both because many times people will come into our offices with a fee appraisal and say, how can you are higher than this? And they want us to check that down. So we have to know all about that. And we do. So we're able to. On a couple other things. Now, as far as one thing you have to remember, this bill does not give us the right to appeal anything. It gives us the right to question the Department of Revenue as number one, to make sure, hey, are you guys getting this information? I mean, I would just as soon happy to be working with the Department of Revenue on this when it happens, when we get into this. As far as now, if we did feel it, we would have a voice to the legislation saying, we think there's something wrong. That would be the worst case scenario. And I kind of doubt that would happen. I think the state should welcome the assessors to actually help them out and take a look at this. We don't do these kind of appraisals every day, but I believe Al Muneer and I took the same utility course back in 2003. And I know I kept all my information. So a lot of times you just got to go back and research to get refreshed on it and ask a lot of questions of people who do know this type of appraisal. Now, the assessor, the difference between the Department of Revenue and the assessors, the Department of Revenue, they're appointed. The assessors were elected to take care of our county, so we should have the right to make sure our county and our school districts and special districts and everybody else is getting their fair share. As far as the auditing of the Department of Revenue, auditing the procedures is one thing. Taking a look at the appraisal and checking that out is totally different. I mean, so yes, I'm sure they could pass an audit on the procedures they're using, but whether or not the appraisal is good, and it very well could be. We don't know that for sure. And we'd like to see how Wyoming's doing it and compare them to other states. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Questions from Mr. Meyer, committee? I see no hands. Thank you very much for appearing virtually. We appreciate your time.
welcome.
Travel far this time, but thank you very much, Mr. Meyer. Is there anyone else in the room that wishes to testify? If so, jump up. If not, sit down. Mr. Obermiller looks like he wants to get up. Go ahead, Mr. Obermiller. Welcome to Revenue Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be here. Pete Obermiller, President, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, as the bill is written, we oppose the bill. It's been an interesting discussion. I've learned a lot about it because I think there is a discussion to be had about appraisal methodology, and that discussion is always warranted. At the end of the day, both appraisal methodology to a certain extent, but moreover, who is in charge of appraising is ultimately a policy decision on your part, and that discussion is reasonable. The trouble is, this bill doesn't do any of that. That discussion should be had and should probably be had during an interim session, and that would be fine. But this bill is blunt force trauma when it appears that a needle prick is what's necessary. The bill actually captures all state assessed property as it's written, including mineral production, and including, importantly, midstream members, pipelines, interstate pipelines that have very interesting and unique appraisal methodologies. I know that you all received a white paper that was signed by several industry groups and companies about that, so I won't belabor that point. But Mr. Chairman, from our perspective, if we want to have a discussion about, as it's become clear during testimony, that the discussion is entirely about whether or not some wind turbines, not even all of them, should be appraised at the local level, fine. But let's not take, like has been our habit a little bit recently, to take small problems for in isolated cases, blow them up very large, and rope in everyone who's not a problem and probably shouldn't be a part of it. Mr. Chairman, one real quickly on the privacy aspect. If the bill were to pass as it is right now, it would put it in this part of statute, ad valorem statute, in conflict with severance, which has the privacy provisions inside the severance statute, and the two, ad valorem and severance, would then be in conflict in terms of the proprietary information provisions. I understand, Mr. Chairman, that there may be an amendment coming, which I appreciate, that attempts to exempt, for reasons that Ms. Huxtable mentioned before, and other reasons that may exempt mines and mining claims, crude oil, lease condensate. Appreciate that. That amendment by itself would not be quite enough for the Petroleum Association anyway. And I would suggest, if you do move that amendment, that you also add the amendment would read mines and mining claims, crude oil, lease condensate, natural gas, and property of pipeline companies. That, Mr. Chairman, would then at least limit the scope of the bill a little bit more towards what you're trying to accomplish, though it leaves in the rest of the state assessed properties. I would be remiss if I didn't say that for other state assessed properties, their objections are similar to mine. So the philosophy question, the policy question remains, and probably should be taken up in another in another setting. Be happy to take questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Mr. Obermiller committee? Go ahead, Senator Case.
I just want to say Mr. Obermiller shared his proposed amendment with me, and we've been sharing back and forth the amendment that the previous part. So he also certainly shared the pipeline piece, and I appreciate that. He's always good about that. Thank you.
Further questions, committee? Thank you, Mr. Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else in the audience wish to testify? Mr. Netai. Everybody's using that same chair. It's staying warm. That's why they're going there. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Netai. Welcome to Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Travis Netai, Wyoming Mining Association, and I love getting up and testifying after Mr. Obermiller because I just say ditto. My membership has concerns as well, and Pete voiced them very eloquently. We cannot support the bill as it is right now. Appreciate the idea of an amendment, but this really is, again, it's you got a small problem with a small sector of the industry, and all of a sudden everybody else is drug into it. And I don't have to tell anybody up on that dais right now, the mining industry is tough. It's there's a lot of uncertainty, and this is just one more thing that we wish we wouldn't have to deal with. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my brief testimony and stand for questions.
Questions, committee? I see no questions. You didn't get the chair warm. Thank you very
All
much
right.
for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further testimony? Jump on up here. Chair of your choice.
It's not so hot, right?
Go ahead. Welcome to Revenue.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Wendy Lau, and I'm here today representing the Williams companies. And I did send an email to all of you that you've probably seen. I should pay attention to the adages of lobbyists that don't attend a committee meeting unless you're prepared to testify. I did think I heard my name invoked by former Chairman Almanier, but I actually thought we talked more about walking our dogs during COVID than the topic at hand. But nevertheless, we're a state and we all know each other very well. I don't have anything else to add. The way the bill is drafted, it includes all state assessed property, all centrally assessed property, and Williams is a midstream gathering line and interstate pipeline company in the state. They have two large interstate pipelines, and I was trying to explain to them how they ended up in this bill, and they would appreciate being removed if there isn't a concern. Any questions?
Questions from Ms. Lowe?
Thank you.
No questions. Thank you very much. Again, the seat did not warm up. Are there further who wish to testify? And he's going to the other end of the table. Go ahead, sir. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard, and I represent Dish Network, which has the uplink facility east of the city of Cheyenne here. And I also represent Lumen, which you most frequently would understand them to be CenturyLink. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we're concerned about this bill. We oppose it as written. We're both state centrally assessed taxpayers as well. And we're being drug into this by a desire, as you've heard in previous testimony, for a separate industry. I do not have an amendment prepared, but I would ask if you do work this bill that you would remove the telecom industry from the aspects of this proposal. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions.
Questions from Mr. Pickard, committee? I see none. Thank you very much, Mr. Pickard. Any further testimony here on the floor? Seeing none, is there anyone with a hand raised online?
Yes, sir. We will begin with Dan Neal and then move to Liz Zerga, Robert Hendry, and Tom Darren to begin.
Very good. Why don't you let a couple of those in at a time? And we'll go ahead and hear their testimony first from Mr. Neal. I see a face. Go ahead, ma'am. And I'd say your name, but I can't see your name. I'm sorry. We're looking through 3 layers of plexiglass.
That's Ms. Zerga.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Liz Zerga. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Hope the broadband internet connection is good. I represent the Wyoming Telecommunications Association. I won't take up a great deal of your time. We are signatories on the white paper that I believe you received, and we support the testimony of industry that came before you. We don't have anything to do with wind or wind projects, and we cannot support the bill as written. And those are my brief comments, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Uri. Any questions, committee? No, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Let's let the next 2 people in if we can. That way we move just a little bit faster. Okay, is that Mr. Neal? Is that who I see? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Dan Neal. I'm representing the Wyoming Energy Forum here, a coalition of Wyoming citizens concerned about the pace and impact of wind development particularly, but we're also concerned that the state obtain the taxes it needs to serve both these industries and all the others you've been hearing from. I'd like to say, first of all, simply ditto to the comments of Mr. Manier and the assessors. I would like to say that I think one way to think of this proposal is that the assessors could function as a force multiplier with people on the ground where these wind farms are located. And we think that could be valuable to the state and to the Department of Revenue. I have no question about Mr. Noble's ability to manage the Department of Revenue with the greatest integrity. So I certainly don't think this should be seen at all as any sort of a question mark about the Department of Revenue. I think it's more a matter of capacity, and to add the assessors to the mix could certainly help assure that the state collects all the taxes it's due. Thank you.
Thank you much, Mr. Neal. Questions, committee? Thank you very much. Let's admit, I believe there's 2 more people who wish to testify. I see 1 more. Well, can anybody tell me a name on this? Oh, we got 2 up. What is it?
His last name is Darren.
Oh, okay, Mr. Darren, go ahead.
Thank you, Maya. I think someone might have been ahead of me, but I'll go now.
You're good. We can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tom Darren, and I'm with the American Clean Power Association, and we represent the top wind, solar, storage, and transmission companies in the country. Just as an important footnote and maybe some continuing familiarity, I used to be with the American Wind Energy Association. As of January 1st of this year, we merged into a more multi-tech organization, again, American Clean Power. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I have 3 brief points to make. First, and Chairman and Senator Case, I appreciate the conversation we had, again, with many of the same great folks last fall in the interim, Mr. Noble, Ms. Huxtable. And I just want to recap just one or 2 points from that, because it is influencing what we're talking about today. And just remind everybody that the wind industry is paying taxes on our facilities, whether it's utility owned or independent power produced projects. And we're paying for all the equipment we install and all the facilities, we're paying that at the 11.5% industrial rate. Now, on top of that, and this is part of where the heart of the conversation is, we lease out, for most of our projects, we have leases with private landowners, and that through the DOR, because it is state assessed property, there's a valuation on that is in addition to the equipment we install. And then there's that conversation about, is that at the ag rate or is that at the 11.5% industrial rate? And I just want to note that, and we can, we've had lots of landowners and ranchers testify to this, but when said and done and our facilities are constructed, we have an enduring impact of about 2 to 3% of the leased acreage, meaning over 95% of what we lease out in Wyoming is fully compatible and is still fully used. We heard testimony about it in another committee today for traditional ranching and agricultural operations in Wyoming. So I think there is an important conversation there about whether that vast acreage and how it's taxed. Point number two, my association and the companies I represent are opposed to this bill because it's unnecessary. As Ms. Huxtable already testified today, county assessors have access in this framework, in this bill, to the data relied upon by the Department of Revenue. They need, and this is under 3913-102 Q small 2I capital B, but it's right there in the statute. Ms. Huxtable referenced it. Any other government entity, upon a showing that notice was given to the taxpayer, again, it doesn't have to be agreement from the taxpayer, but just notice to them. If that notice is given and there's a sufficient reason shown by the county assessor in this case, which Ms. Huxtable did and met that requirement, they get data and they get information from DOR. So there is a provision to address, what's being contemplated here at the crux of this statute. Now, if I heard Ms. Huxtable's testimony correct, she had an issue with what DOR provided her. And just to let the record be very clear on this, I have a great respect for Ms. Huxtable and also for Mr. Noble and his department. But it seems like there is a little bit of a conversation between the two of them and the local and the state entities. I think that's maybe fair to say from what I heard today. If you go to the proposed, fix in this bill, and let me just flip over to that on my screen to quote the language. There are two things in play. Upon what circumstances will this information be provided to other government entities, or in this case, county assessors, and then the type of information? So under capital A, where the proposed change is, it says information, blah, 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 will be given to the county assessor of where the county is located. Well, Ms. Huxtable got information from DOR under the existing provision in the statute. And again, it seems like there's a conversation about the type of information that was provided. So this bill doesn't get at the problem. This bill doesn't change the fact that there is an avenue within the existing law, to achieve the intended purposes. We pay a lot of property taxes in Wyoming. We paid last year, our statistics show that we paid $14.7 million in combined wind generation, property taxes, and sales and use tax. So this isn't a question, you're not hearing from my industry that we don't want to pay taxes or that we want to get involved and appeal all these and pay lower taxes. We just have a real, serious concern about the manner in which our highly confidential and proprietary information is released and to whom it's released. And again, I'll stop here, but there is an avenue for the county assessor to obtain that. We heard Ms. Huxtable say that she abides by the strict confidentiality agreements, and we have no reason to question that. We know she's doing that, and others are too. So let's just let the existing law play out, and we don't need this change. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Darren. Questions, committee? Seeing no questions, thank you very much for the testimony. The next gentleman I'd recognize anywhere, Commissioner Henry. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfect. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Senator Baldwin and members of the committee. Assessor Huxtable and Assessor Myers did a good job, and the assessors deal with most all of the taxes in the county. They know about individuals and companies, and they know about confidentiality. So there isn't a problem there. We're their eyes and ears out in the county, and our assessors, one of the things is how many towers that you have, that the Department of Revenue has on that individual's property, how many miles of road, how many power lines, how many miles of power lines. Those are the kind of things that those local people can help. The Department of Revenue do a great job. They do a good job doing that, but we just need to make sure that their figures and our figures would match up. If there's a company that retrofitted their towers, and that's going on a lot now in Natrona and Converse County, mainly coming out of Natrona, going to Converse, they're making those towers bigger. Well, we know that's happening, but without the ability to go to the state and find out if they know that's happening, we don't want anything and above a fair tax. And the companies, man, we like wind and solar. One of these days, they may be the last thing we have. The administration in DC wants oil and gas and coal gone. So we need the wind power, and we like them, and solar. But that's just all I have, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get on there. I entered into the meeting the wrong direction, and so I finally got in. Thank you, and I'd stand for any questions.
We appreciate you being here today, Commissioner Henry. The virtual world can be a tough one. Any questions for Commissioner? Committee? No questions. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the waiting room would like to come in virtually? I'm assuming that, do we have any more virtual visitors? Oh, there's one more, another very familiar face. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chris Brown representing Powering Up Wyoming. We are a Wyoming grassroots organization promoting renewable energy as part of an all of the above energy strategy in Wyoming. And like Mr. Darren, we too stand opposed to Senate File 69. As Mr. Darren stated, and as numerous others have, stated, wind companies work directly with the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And from our perspective, things are already being done correctly, and that there really isn't an additional need to disseminate confidential data more than necessary. And so, Mr. Chairman, I don't have much more to add other than that. We stand opposed, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Any questions, committee? No questions. Thank you very much. I like your background a lot. I wish I was there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Imagine it with wind turbines. Imagine it. Okay, is there any further virtual testimony?
Mr. Chairman, no, there is not.
Very good. Any further on the floor testimony? Everyone likes their chairs and their warmers. With that being said, we'll close this and take it to the committee. Does anyone have a motion?
I'll move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Bill is moved by Chairman Case. Committee, let's discuss it.
I would have a proposed amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Go
Just
ahead.
to kick it along. I'm going to look for the pinprick. So I asked earlier about why are some wind farms even state assessed, because those wind farms are not owned by electric utilities. It's clear in the statute that electric utilities are state assessed. Makes sense to me. And you have comparables because there's all sorts of data. The problem really is the non-state assessed wind facilities that are, the state assessed wind facilities that aren't owned by an electric utility. So let's just share the information about that. So the proposed amendment, which I would move, is to go to page 2, line 14, after the word property, insert under 39-13-102, little m, Romanet 3, that is not owned by electric utilities. So if I get the statute up, Romanet 39-13-102M, Romanet 3 literally says property of electric utilities. But we know that some of the property that we state assess is not owned by electric utilities, but it is it produces electricity. So what this amendment would do is the new language would say, information related to state assessed property under 39-13-102, small m, Romanet 3, that is not owned by electric utilities may be released upon request of the county assessor of a county where the property is located. It kind of comes at this in two ways, Mr. Chairman, because it's definitely the needle print. It gets a lot of people off the back, and I understand that. But secondly, it also exposes the fact that, gee, maybe this stuff should be locally assessed to begin with. I mean, it's an arguable thing. That's not what the law says. So this is a compromise to go forward. What do you think? I make the motion.
Questions, committee, comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Senator Schul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. So I assume then your other amendment that you had recently.
That's my fault.
No problem. So that one will be gone. This will be the new one. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you for that clarification.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, the other amendment was, carving out ad valorem minerals, and we'd add pipelines, and then communications would want to be added, and we'd get back to the same thing in a very long way. Mr. Obermiller made me think of this with the pinprick idea, and I just had my second shot last week, so I'm ready.
It did you good, Mr. Chairman. Any further questions or comments on the amendment? Seeing none, the question on the floor is the amendment proposed by Senator Case. Did we get that amendment in okay?
I've got a copy.
Got it. Okay, very good. Question is, all those in favor of the amendment proposed by Senator Case, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. That amendment passes. Further comments or amendments, committee?
Mr. Chairman, can we just ask if you previously opposed the bill, could you become neutral with this amendment? Raise your hand.
I see one thumb, two thumbs. I see thumbs.
He's picking his nose. I'm not sure.
I think that's a yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Question?
Question on the bill. Let's call a roll.
On Senate File 69, Senator Baldwin,
Aye.
Senator James, Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Senator Schuler,
No.
and Chairman Case.
Aye.
And on Senate File 69, that would be 3 ayes and 2 noes. Do pass amended.
Thank you. The next file for our consideration is, what's your name of your file, Senator Hicks? It's a longevity pay. Would you like to get us started? Senate File 97, State Employee Longevity Pay Prospective Repeal.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is a simple little bill. Just goes into our state compensation program for state employees. 92102 goes in and it says state compensation plans shall provide the following procedures to establish changes and individual pay rates. Pay rates are shall be determined based on knowledge, skills, abilities, experience, responsibilities, requirements, professional licensures, certification, registration, labor market considerations, salaries in the public and private sector, labor markets, and did to be determined by the division. General pay increases can only be done by the legislature. Pay increases based on performance shall be approved consistent with the performance appraisal system, and then promotion pay increases may be approved when an employee moves to a higher job. Mr. Chairman, that's pretty consistent employment policies, whether you're in your private sector, government employee, any sector. Those are pretty consistent labor policies, but we do have a provision in here, which is 920122 subsection B. And it just goes in, and this is the bill, members of the committee, if you turn to page 2, and we have what we call longevity pay increases. And under that policy, longevity pay increases shall be approved at a rate of $40 per month for each 5 years of service.
It shall not be considered as part of the base pay. I have no idea how long this policy's been in place, but it just seems to me that if you really want to increase your pay, you do it through skills, knowledge, ability, responsibility, and you move up the pay scale. We provide every opportunity for our state employees to do that. My own personal opinion, I think it's not good employment policy just to pay people to stay there in the same position for everything. So all the bill does with any new hires starting July 1st of this year, it would repeal any longevity pay for any new hires, sets a sunset on it and eliminates that program. Would draw your attention to the fiscal note because this wouldn't have any effect if we enacted this July. It's 5 years. But at that point in time, it's estimated that it would save the state approximately $500,000 a year starting in 2027. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's the bill.
Questions for Senator Hicks? Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hicks, I was just curious why you didn't stop it for current employees on the same time period, not do anything retroactive, but just stop that, stop it from this point on. Thank you.
You know, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's certainly something that, you know, in the past, we've attempted similar things and have run into issues. There's a perception that a deal's a deal, and when they were hired, this was the deal, and we need to honor the deal. We had a similar provision for another employment sector in the state of Wyoming, and that was vetoed last year based on that premise that, you know, when you hired me under these circumstances, these were the terms and conditions of my hire. So it's just to honor that. That's the answer, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Senator Baldwin.
I just have a quick question. That question is, you talked about the state providing opportunities for those people to move up and advance their pay grade. What about those people that don't have that opportunity? And it just comes to mind, there's probably more of a snowplow driver. You know, he's not going to become an engineer unless he goes back to school. He's not going to do it, et cetera. What about those people? What opportunity do they have to advance their pay grade?
It's called
Senator
maintenance.
Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, it's called maintenance supervisor. So you move from initial hire where you get the bottom end of the pay scale. And then as you progressively build in your knowledge and your skills, there is opportunity to move up. And even within our state employees, a lot of times what we see is we train them and then they go into the private sector. So it's a free job market. And sometimes one of the biggest problems we have, quite frankly, is that we train a lot of employees, and with that training, then they move into the private sector to make more money with the training they receive from the state. But specific to your example, there's numerous opportunities to move up. And that's typically what we see. If they're motivated and they have the skills and the ability and the knowledge and the desire, they'll be a maintenance supervisor as they move up that scale with the example that you had referenced, Senator Baldwin.
Anybody else? Senator Hicks? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question also, and I think this is probably a good move. Is there, or do the directors now have the opportunity to do like performance pay raises or bonuses? I'm not sure. I'm just asking for clarification.
Senator Hicks.
Under the provisions under our current employment statutes, it says special pay increases may be approved by the governor using available funds. So unless we have many cases where we have employees that are partially paid by federal programs or mostly, they may have a different arrangement. But that's the only provision for special pay right now within our current statutes would be something out of the approved by the governor.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Senator Hicks. Who else would like to address the committee? Mr. DeCarius, former Senator DeCarius, welcome. I remember when he didn't have gray hair.
Me too.
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ken DeCarius, and today, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little different role. I'm representing the Wyoming Public Employees Association. And Mr. Chairman, we would urge the non-support of this particular piece of legislation. And Mr. Chairman, one of the things that could be helpful for would be the recruitment and retention of employees into the system. One thing, Mr. Chairman, I think everybody's aware, as far as when we talk about advancement, state employees haven't had any raise. I don't think they're going to get a raise. They've had an increase in retirement contributions. They've had an increase in healthcare benefits. And so their pay is basically going backwards. Mr. Chairman, this doesn't even kick in for 5 years, so if you work 5 years, then it's $40 a month. That is an increase. And so it would be an incentive for people to stay around. And Mr. Chairman, just a little bit, the way I read the fiscal note, for one thing, there'd be no savings for 5 years because it wouldn't even go into effect for 5 years. But after that, it just says that for the state's part of it, it's 285,000, 77,000 federal funds and 141 in other funds. So, I mean, it's not $500,000 total savings, and I would agree, but not $500,000 in, general fund savings. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, I would just encourage the committee to not pass this piece of legislation. I'm happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeCarry. It's good to see you, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity, how many people have turned down this job because they said because this wasn't available, or this was a potential that this wouldn't be available?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I have no idea. I wouldn't have any idea about that. I'm not involved in the day-to-day.
Well, I mean, you use this as an example, so I thought maybe you might have some numbers or something like that. So if you're going to use this in your testimony, you might want to have some numbers or something like that. So.
And Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
Senator James, I think anybody that takes a job looks at the entire compensation package before they take a job or a position. And so that would be part of it. I mean, anybody that is paying attention anyway, I would think would ask all those questions before they take employment.
Okay, Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, to that point, I don't know how anybody could get those numbers since this is not
You're right.
available at this point. It's not law. How would anybody have a number on how this would affect them when today, for most people, this would be the first time this would ever become effective. Well, when it comes effect in July, there are no historical numbers, so you just couldn't. He couldn't provide that if he had it.
And
Senator DeCarry, or Mr. DeCarry.
Thank you, Mr.
Sorry.
Chairman. Sorry, Mr. Chairman and Senator Pappas, and that would be one thing I would say with the fiscal note also is it's a guess at best. I mean, I guess you look at historical, records of the state hiring people, but the state has kind of gone the opposite way as far as their hiring practices, and they've actually terminated, state employees in the last couple of years. So there are fewer state employees. So I don't know how many people they would hire and how you would get your hands around that figure. I think it would just be a pretty rough estimate of the figure in the fiscal note.
Senator Schuler, you got any questions for your predecessor?
No, other than calling the other day, jealous because he lives down south.
Lavelle, are there people online? Anybody online that wish to testify? Just let everybody in if they are.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, we have a representative from Department of A&I. We have their director, but otherwise we don't have anyone that has indicated they wish to provide public comment.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. If anyone does, get our attention as soon as you can. Anybody else in the audience? Mr. Lovett, you could testify on this. You just ran out of longevity, and congratulations for that. Anything else, Senator Hicks?
Mr. Chairman, just on the fiscal note,
Is your mic on, Ms. Senator?
Just real quick on the fiscal note where it says the 141,608 other funds, those are typically enterprise funds that are derived through fees or state parks or, for those agencies. So while they may not be specific to general fund, they're still paid for typically by an agency, as I understand it, out of the, could be their enterprise fund. Federal funds, when we all know where those come from. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I see no further testimony, so, oh, we've got somebody waving. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Very sorry. On the screen, we don't have a name for you, but you're at the big table and you're waving like crazy.
Director.
Go ahead. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I did raise my hand and they admitted me, but for some reason I didn't show up as wanting to testify. My name is Patricia Bach. I'm the A&I director. Obviously, we're neutral on the bill, but I did want to stand for any questions. I had a couple comments that might clarify a few things. One of them being, we believe that this process or the longevity pay has been in place for 30 plus years. So it's as long as anybody who's been around can remember. We don't have an exact date, but we could get you that if you needed it. I did want, I think some of the testimony is very straightforward and clear. It's 5 years before it takes effect, so you won't see any savings for 5 years. $285,000 approximately for the general fund. The one thing that I did want to mention, there's two things. There's a lot of times there'll be an employee who, for example, works for YDOT, and then they apply for a job at the Department of Health. So they transfer over into that job. They will continue or should continue their longevity because there's no break in service. They're still a state employee. So one of the ways the fiscal note is hard is for those employees to figure out exactly who would be transferring in 5 years. So some of the discussion that we've had is how we would budget that. So we wouldn't want to say, okay, these are vacant positions. We're going to take the longevity out because there'll be new people in July. We have to be careful with that because we do have transfers. So that's one area of just concern for budgetary purposes. And I will mention that some of the, and I know Senator James asked the question on how do you know with recruitment. And I do think it's very hard to figure out what the recruitment is. In our minds, $40 might not be a lot. For a custodian making $11.58 an hour, $40 a month to stick around for 5 years is a lot of money. So I would just caution us there. And then we struggle a little bit in the state to retain employment or employees past that three to 4 year mark. And having the longevity be something that hits at 5 years is helpful. I won't say that it would make a make or break or make a huge difference, but I did want to make sure that was available and that you understood where the statistics were with that. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the director? Any questions for the director? Senator James. We're gonna have to make it all quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you say you struggle to keep employees past a 3 to 4 year mark, what percentage would you say actually make it past that 3 to 4 year mark?
Go ahead, Ms. Director, if you can.
Chairman Case, Senator James, I think that is also something we could get to you. I think the Department of Corrections is a good example. We lose a lot of our correctional officers around that time. If we are able to incentivize that $40, it's helpful. So that's a tool we use. It doesn't mean that it's a make or break, like I said. But it is definitely a tool we use in recruitment, and it's a tool we use to keep people around for that 5 year mark.
Thank you, Director. Anybody? We've got to make it quick. We are already late getting back, so go ahead.
Yeah, if you could just get us that the statewide 3 to 4 year mark on what percentage makes it past that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Director. Any other questions for the director? Seeing none. Senator Hicks, anything? Is there a motion on the bill? Is there a motion on the bill? Senator James has made a motion. Discussion of the bill? You ready for the question? Lavelle, would you please call the roll?
On Senate File 97, Senator Baldwin,
No.
Senator James. Senator Pappas.
No.
Senator Schuler. And Chairman Case.
Aye. It's failed 2-3. Thank you very much. Are we going to caucus or are we going on the floor? Okay, we'll go find out. Lavelle, I'll be happy to sign anything when you get around to it. Should I do it now? Okay.